I was about to say, ooh, that scared me. I was
Mhm.
about to say good morning, but it's evening. So good evening. If y'all want to drop in the chat where y'all are at, so I can see where people are, what city, what state, what country, continent, planet, drop it in the chat. Okay, Baltimore, ATL, NYC, LA, Germany. Oh my God, BGIA is international. Chicago, New York, LA, Philly, Philly. Okay, y'all are all over. I love this. Well, we're gonna get started in about 3 minutes. So about 6:10, we'll be getting started. We'll let people trickle in. So yeah, so just hold tight. Okay, y'all, we are going to go ahead and get started. Just a few housekeeping rules. We're going to do a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, be sure to write them down or you can put them in the chat and then when it's time for the Q&A, we'll go back and answer them. So yeah, just make note of all the questions that you have. But welcome to join us. We're so glad that you're here for shifting the narrative. And just joining Black Girls in Archives. If you don't know, my name is Kyah Harris. I work with Black Girls in Archives as the director of fashion. So I pretty much handle all things fashion related, specifically with Black Girls in Archive fashion. I'm also a fashion historian and a fashion stylist based in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole for her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. I'm Nicole. I'm a fashion historian, archivist, and researcher. I am also a professor and I also am a collection specialist. So I do a variety of different projects and produce a series of different works.
Thanks, Nicole. Tianni, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Tianni Graham. I am the principal archivist at Browne and the founder of Archival Live, where I provide context to rare archival content with a focus on Black culture and fashion history and their intersections. In addition to that, I am a curator, a researcher. Um, and just fashion historian.
Amazing. And Taniqua.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Taniqua. I'm a fashion historian as well as the founder of Black Fashion History, which is a platform that highlights contributions of Black people in the diaspora to the fashion industry. And I am excited to be here and talk with you all.
Yes, thank y'all so much for introducing yourselves. I'm beyond excited to have this discussion. I just love talking about fashion with people who also share that same interest in fashion. So I'm so excited just to see how our conversation is going to go tonight. So I'm just going to jump right into our first question. And since we ended with you, Taniqua, let's start with you for our first question. So, how has fashion in your life or family told a story about your heritage or identity?
Thank you. Great question. Um, I would say like fashion has been a piece of my life since I was a child, most especially seeing the representation of my mother. So I'm Liberian American, first generation to immigrant parents. Um, both of my parents come from Liberia, and my mom really used clothes to make sure that she always stayed connected to her, her home country, even here in the States, and even having been here for like over 40 years at this point. I remember growing up and my mom would go to work in her African clothes. They would try to send her home because they would tell her that's not appropriate. And so this is like in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. They would try to send her home and tell her like, oh, that's not professional wear, that's not work attire. But I would see her get up every single day, the next day and the next day and next day and put that on. And what I didn't realize then, but I know now, is that that was her way of not only honoring, her heritage and her culture, where she came from, but teaching me how to always acknowledge where I came from and also kind of disrupt the norm, right? Because who says that that isn't professional? Like, who gets to make that call, and just being a representation of herself in that space. And that taught me a lot about how I show up and how I use clothes to make sure that I am always representing myself and making the narrative and the rules for myself and not allowing other people to do that for me.
I love that. And I think me and you had this discussion at our Met Gala event last week about how just Black peoples and Black bodies are constantly like policed or watched.
Right.
So it's just really interesting, like to hear you say that. And I think that's a lot of our experience as well as Black people, just always feeling policed or watched or monitored in some way. So thank you so much for sharing that. So let's go to Tianni. How has fashion shaped your life or family or told a story about your identity?
So both of my parents are from Long Island, New York. On my dad's side, my paternal grandfather is from Honduras. But I grew up like pretty much in American culture, Black American culture, and we didn't really like save clothes to pass them on. We more donated clothes or hand-me-downs if they were outgrown or you didn't like them anymore. Um, so that like in the sense of heritage, I more so connect jewelry to that. because that's something that we saved and looked more as heirlooms, like bangles. I've had these set of bangles since I was 10 years old. My wrists have not grown since then. So I just make them, it's like a part of my identity. It's like when a warrior puts on their armor, that's what it's like to me. Like I feel naked if I don't have on like jewelry or bangles, rings, a necklace, and earrings. Like right now I don't have on rings, which feels weird, but it's like you're just in the house, so it's okay. um but yeah, as far as fashion though, I always like associated it with like stepping out, like either going to the club. My family, they were huge partiers, so just the ritual of going to Jamaica Avenue or Roosevelt Field to get a new outfit, and then getting your jewelry from the Coliseum, getting your hair done, like the whole ritual of it all is like kind of, I guess, the heritage, what connects me to my heritage, and church as well. My great uncle was a bishop, and his son became the pastor. His wife was the worship leader. So, being close relatives to the people who ran the church, you had like higher expectations to show up and show out as far as fashion. So that's like my heritage as I connected to fashion.
I love that. And I never thought of like thinking of fairly family heirlooms in the sense of like jewelry, because I have like a lot of my jewelry that I wear is like from like my grandmother, or like from my mother. So like this ring that I have on now right here was, I think this was my grandma's. And so she gave it to me. And so when you said that, I was like, oh my goodness, like these are considered like family heirlooms. And so they should be like, you know, protected or valued in some way. So that was just kind of like a light bulb moment for me to even think of it that way. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. And I think also their mind frame was if you fell on hard times, you would be able to pawn jewelry and get more money for it as opposed to clothes.
That's a good point. Because I spend a lot of money on clothes, but can't do it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So
clothes had a good return.
Right. If you take it to Beacon's Closet, they gonna give you like $5 for something
It's
that's real
that.
nice. Exactly.
those closet, you can take 75 bags and they'll be like, here's $3.
And they be like,
Hmm.
it's out of season. Like I just bought this yesterday.
Right. I'm like, y'all literally have this in
Like
here.
y'all have it right here. I'm looking at it. They be like, no,
Hmm.
it's out of season.
They
Right.
like to play. Play-Dohs loves to play in our kids. But that's a good point because a lot of like clothes don't have a lot of value, but they say like it's designer like bags and shoes and jewelry that usually carry much more value. So
Hmm.
that's just an excuse for me to shop more. So
Sorry.
Nicole, what about you? How has fashion in your life or family told a story about your identity or heritage?
So I am a first generation American, second generation immigrant, and my parents met in California actually. My dad's from Venezuela and my mom's from El Salvador. So in terms of tangible objects, I guess that started within California. I think that's just a common story with migration stories, but jewelry seems to be the most tangible item that has been passed on through each generation. And that has a lot to do with my maternal grandmother's story. She actually used to sell jewelry, gold jewelry, as a side hustle when she came to the States. So a lot of the jewelry that I inherited is actually, I guess you could say, from her personal collection that I technically stole from my mom, but she doesn't wear them anymore. So I think that's okay. Um, and what's also interesting is that most recently I kind of consider fashion in my life, um, or realize fashion in my life has always been a kind of quiet storyteller because my grandmother's actually from Guatemala. And so recently I found an item called huipil, which is a traditional Guatemalan blouse worn by Mayan women. And it was actually tucked away in my family archive. So that single garment kind of opened up a whole new understanding of my maternal lineage and greater interest to kind of trace our family tree and story and family history, actually. It wasn't just, or it isn't just a garment or a traditional costume. It's like a thread connecting me to a deeper cultural history. I hadn't known that was there or even existed. And a lot of that has to do with, again, these migration stories where we rely a lot on oral history, oral traditions. But with that said, um, with my family, I come from a lot of generations who were fiber artists, craft makers, domestic artists, and creatives. And so these discoveries feel almost sacred. Fashion for me certainly holds memory. It carries voices, techniques, and legacies that weren't always written down. And so that's something that I'm currently interested in exploring and preserving and researching, and that goes hand in hand with fashion in my life for sure.
I love that. And that's something I've been working on too, is understanding like my like heritage and family history through fashion, because like my grandmother was a seamstress, so like I would go to her house and I would see her, like altering like her clothes or like her buying clothes. Like she was my first introduction into fashion because she wasn't into like designer items, but she always was so well dressed and I was like, "Grandma, like you look so good. Like I want to be just like you when I grow up." And so just seeing how she would put herself together was, I think that was like my main introduction into fashion. So I feel like right now I'm kind of retracing like my family heritage to like go back and understand like what's going on in my family from a fashion perspective. So I love to hear that you're kind of doing that similarly.
And it all started with a fashion object found in my family archive. And if I probably would have never came across that, I wonder if I would have ever been curious about my family lineage even more.
I guess I have a follow-up question for you. Is was your When you started your family like archive, was that your introduction into archives, or was that kind of like, when did it start?
That was actually after. I started in the fashion archival realm years ago with more of fashion designer items. I specialized in Japanese designers, and then that kind of progressed and evolved to other American fashion designers. And then little by little, I kind of wanted to be a little bit more connected with the work that I was doing. And that's when I became curious about what do I have accessible to me with my family archive and specifically with personal closets, because I do believe a lot of the garments that I've inherited or hand-me-downs are family heirlooms. And I wear it on my body. I don't necessarily preserve it in storage or archival boxes for it to never be seen. I use it as an everyday wardrobe part of my everyday life. And I think that's important to me. It initially was not intentional, but I do believe now, as I've kind of progressed in this field, it certainly is intentional to make more memories through the wear, through the process of wearing these garments that I've inherited.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a pair of like my grandma's Tommy Hilfiger jeans from like, I don't know, but it has like the logos like going down the side. I've never seen it before, but I wear it like almost every single day. So yeah, definitely like including it like into my wardrobe for sure. So I'm gonna
And,
go to our
oh, like
oh,
before you go to the next question, I I had a comment. That actually is really interesting because I don't look through like my family clothing and think about um the clothes that are passed down to me as like sort of archiving, our family history through fashion. But I do approach the way that I buy clothes today from that lens. So I kind of think through like, what am I buying and what do I want to pass down? And like, what story do I want to tell to the generations after me when they keep these pieces of clothing. So I'm very, very intentional about shopping with Black designers, especially the Black designers that are popular today. Because when I think back to like 20, 30, 40 years ago and designers that were Black designers that were popular then and how those brands no longer exist, I want my children and my children's children, even if they don't wear it, to have a piece of kind of the brands that are booming today. Um, and hopefully they last for a really long time, but in the event that they don't, it's a way to tell the story of the time. And so that's kind of how I approach shopping now. But I think I'm going to go back to like my mom's things and kind of look at it from that lens and capture those pieces, and keep that as well. So thank y'all for that.
I
Absolutely.
just want to, or can I guess, add on that?
Yeah.
I have this 1970s dress that my grandmother purchased from a department store in San Francisco. And it's a dress that honestly is not my personal style. I wouldn't wear it, but it's preserved because I feel like it tells so much of her story transitioning to an American life. The fact that it was very much sort of a Diane von Furstenberg type of 70s dress. And I think that is so significant in terms of her story. It's sort of a way for me to understand her experience, but also I believe like as her way of archiving her story through her garments and the fashion objects that she kept. So it's interesting in the sense of like, even though I might not necessarily wear it, it can reveal such a rich narrative and history of the person who did wear it.
Right.
Absolutely. I want to make sure everybody got all their thoughts out before I move on. But I feel like the second question kind of touches on what we've been discussing. So it's how can fashion be used not just to honor history, but to actively shape the future? I'll give y'all some time to marinate.
I'll go. Working at Tom Browne, I see the greatest example of that because we are very self-referential. So they're always pulling from the archive for the next collection to build on the house codes that we've established, and then maybe to establish some new ones as well. So, for example, they could pull. I have a better example. So for our women's fall winter 16 collection, we have these ties that are made in the four headpieces, and they like twist and turn around the head. They frame the face. And they use that as inspiration for Demi Moore's most recent Met Gala look. So it was cool to see how they reimagined an accessory as a headpiece into a full dress, a full gown. And it's fully embroidered, thousands and thousands of beads, hand stitched, the whole nine. So it's cool to see how you can utilize what you've done in the past and then reimagine it for a new event or using new technology, and just improving on the method in which you did it in the first place as well.
When I think about like the future of fashion, I remember when I saw, I think that was Hanifa when they did like that virtual like AI fashion.
Yeah,
That
over
was
the pandemic.
yes, that was like 2020, 2021 maybe. And when I was
Hmm.
thinking about that, I was like, wow, like this is really like I think the future of fashion is going to be like technology, like AI AI based. But so I'm interested to see like how that's going to play a role in um how we experience fashion and how even as like historians but also as consumers as well. So like when I think of the future of fashion, I definitely think of like how technology is going to play a bigger role than it even has before. I even think about um I don't know what year it was, but it was when Caperni they had like the robot dress make it for Bella Hadid. I want to say that was
Mm-hmm.
2020, maybe 2023. So I think we're going to see a lot more like artificial intelligence in fashion, personally. But what about you, Taniqua? What are your thoughts?
I definitely agree with you on the future of fashion being more technologically focused, but I'll also add that I think the future of fashion is sustainability. And so I think as people dig into the way that we made clothes before to the era that we are in now, um, or I would even say like a couple years ago with like fast fashion and mass production, and then the generations that are coming up that care about the planet, not that people before didn't care about the planet, but thinking that like Gen Zers and Gen Alpha are more driven by like causes and socio and political activism. I think it's going to be important for brands to think outside of like mass production and capitalism and move towards a more sustainable model, especially as people become more savvy and kind of understand the amount of waste that fashion produces. Um, so I certainly think going back to fashion in like the early 20th century, as far as like what things were made of and how things were made is something that will certainly be revisited as we think about the future of fashion and we start looking to be more sustainable. And then I think the technology piece adds in there because it gives us a way to kind of manufacture materials so it's less wasteful. So I'm interested to see how all of that comes together in the coming years, when we start looking at like how can brands care more about their carbon footprint.
I definitely agree. And I see another like issue with fashion brands is like I believe it's called like greenwashing, where they'll say like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah,
we're doing these sustainable practices, but we're not actually doing anything." So I'm curious to see like how Gen Z is going to put pressure on these brands to say like, "Hey, you really need to like improve these practices like or else." So I feel like our generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, is really gonna be instrumental in putting like the pressure on these brands to make the changes and not just like say, because these brands will say anything to like get themselves out of hot water. So
right.
I'm hoping that they actually like put the money where their mouth is and actually make change.
I would say it's kind of like what we are seeing with Shein. I would say like, was it last year or maybe the year before that? Whenever they kind of took a bunch of influencers to China to like show them the Shein factory so they could make content to kind of show um how things are produced. And they're pretty much getting dragged online because, again, people didn't feel like they were being honest or transparent about one, the type of labor that they actually use, but also in like the materials and like how they produce things. And Shein has been putting a bad taste in people's mouths since then, once people are starting to get more educated about, what mass production of fashion actually does. Um, Not just to like our physical bodies, but the planet, and then think about like ethics and labor and all that other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I also remember seeing something around Shein. Um, I don't know. People pronounce it both
It's
ways.
let's I'll say I'll correct the question here. It's she in because I remember very vividly when the brand used to be she inside. So that's where it comes from. So that's why it's she in.
I remember that. Oh my goodness. My mind is blown. Okay, so Shein. But I remember seeing something about how like not just how poorly made Shein's clothes are, but like they have like a lot of chemicals. Like there's a lot of chemicals that go
Mm.
into like making these garments, and then like we're putting them on our skin, and then they're not just like sitting on our bodies, like they're soaking in. So like so in essence, it's almost like the clothes aren't good for you. I mean, they're not good for you like ethically, but also just like health wise, there are like health risks that go along with it too. So yeah, I think that's going to be a way bigger conversation in fashion for sure. But what about you, Nicole? How can fashion be used not just to honor history, but to actively shape the future?
I definitely think there's an emphasis on purchasing power. I do think that this generation and the coming generation are more intentional about their purchasing power. So what brands are purchasing, the fact that there's sort of an expectancy of a brand being transparent, whether it be how the garment is made or the ethical labor practices for how it's manufactured. There's definitely going to be more of a demand for transparency. And to kind of connect it to historical clothing, with all the advancements taking place with technology and I do think there's going to be a lot more research or insight in terms of how the accuracy of how historic garments were worn. And I say this in the context of how, in terms of preservation, it's sort of frowned upon to wear historical garments due to conservation and preservation issues. So with something like AI, they can manipulate the garment onto a body, onto an image, and we can actually see a historical garment in movement and how, if it's altered or fragmented or just a piece of that garment, we can use technology to see how it was meant to be seen by its contemporaries when it was made. So there's definitely, I guess, a lot that's going to take place with both technology and also the consumer aspect with purchasing power.
And I think that's a really good point about like purchasing power, because I feel like, look at it like Target. Like once Target came out and they did away with the DEI, people were like, oh, no, like we're not shopping at Target. And look at their numbers, like tanked within the first quarter of 2025. So I think people seeing that your dollars have like are very powerful. I think people are going to realize, okay, like we really, like as a collective, as a society, need to be mindful of like where we shop and like what we're doing. So I definitely agree that purchasing power is going to be huge, because even now, like when I'm trying to get something or get some clothes, I'm like, oh well, let me not go to Target. I'm like, I can go somewhere else, or even just like supporting like mom and pops and small businesses. Like instead of going to like Walmart, Target, CVS, I can go to the little mom and pop shop down the street and actually support a family business and supporting their livelihood. So
And that creates, again, like more of an intentional approach when you are purchasing, whether it be the garments or just everyday objects in general.
exactly. So, and I feel like, I feel good. Like, yes, I am actually helping somebody. I am supporting somebody, and actively supporting my community, because we need these small businesses to support our local communities too. So that's a really, really, really good point.
Yeah, hearing you guys' takes had me thinking about how the implementation of like AI and advanced technology will influence the cost of production. Cause say like they do away with human pattern making and replace it with AI or some automated technology, and the cost to purchase and train that technology is its own separate cost. Would the manufacturers include that cost in their price? Is what I'm thinking, and then like us as consumers, will we feel that?
Mhm.
I think it'll probably, in my mind, I feel like in the long term, it's probably cheaper to train AI one time than the cost of like a human pattern maker. So even if that cost gets like passed on to the consumer, I don't think we'll notice it, which I think it's like has its pros and its cons, right? Because overall, it'll probably make the cost of production cheaper, which means the clothes will be cheaper. Um,
Mm-hmm.
cheaper for consumers, which we're happy about. But then there's the thought of like it could be like the erasure of entire like links in the supply chain, so to speak. You might cut out a whole profession of people that way, like with your example, like pattern makers. And so I think it's a catch 22 sometimes. So another interesting thing to think about would be, well, how do we preserve the human aspect of fashion when technology comes into play and when technology starts doing the things that like we depend on humans to do today?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm also thinking too, like it's gonna be a process for the technology to perform at the level we need it to that humans already do. Because you know, beta mode and different software updates and stuff like that. So it also makes me think like how long would it take for people to phase out of those positions and the technology to completely like replace.
That's a good point. I also think there's an emphasis on like maybe what the outcome of the product is. So I definitely feel like this generation is leaning more towards quality versus quantity. And depending on, I guess, the outcome of the product, that'll kind of determine whether businesses might consider it. And I'm saying that because I do believe with pattern making or any form of artistry that deals with the hands, it's ultimately a tradition. It's a craft making process that I think a lot of individuals seek to preserve and want to preserve, especially with clothing and making. So there's definitely this emphasis of and quality over quantity, but then also like preserving the human imprint on craftsmanship.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think people desire quality over quantity, but I also think that sometimes the economic climate forces us to make decisions that don't necessarily align with our wants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I am curious, like when all of those factors are put into a big pot and come into play, like what will ultimately win? Would it be the people or will it be the machines?
Hmm.
That's kind of scary to think about, just like how these things are gonna play out. Like, is it gonna be like those robot movies where like they all take over, or is it gonna be like I don't think so? I don't think it's gonna be that
I
dramatic, but
think it.
it's
Some days I think so. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I think we're closer to it than we think we are because there's been like years and years of development, like on the low. Like you would know that Stanford and Harvard are doing these experiments and stuff like that, and they have like those little robotics tournaments and stuff. But now it's becoming more mainstream, and we're seeing them being implemented more in like everyday life. Like I remember I was at like a tea house, like an Asian tea house, and they had like the robots serving. And NYPD, they have those robots now. You don't see them too often.
wait, the robots are doing what?
I don't even like surveilling. They're doing a lot of
Okay.
surveillance. And I know that they have like other intentions for them too, but I think like the main thing right now is surveillance.
I don't like that. See, that's why
Yeah.
when I use ChatGPT, I say please and thank you. So
Uh,
when y'all decide to revolt, just know I was nice to y'all. But yeah, I think like you said, that's kind of a scary thought. Like I think we're closer than we really realize. So
hmm.
which is quite terrifying. But just to make a slight pivot into our next question, because I know we've talked about just like preservation and like celebrating our family heritage, history, and identity. What is a small but impactful way that everyday people can contribute to the preservation and celebration of diverse fashion history? I know that's a mouthful, so I can repeat it.
I would say off the top of my head, take pictures. Um, Also real pictures, not just to post on
Mm,
Instagram, like print out your pictures. And
Dog filter on Snapchat.
yeah. And
Mm.
the reason why I say that is a lot of what we understand about fashion from the past is because of the images that we have, the magazines that we have to look back at. Of course, there are times where images weren't a thing, but images really tell a story more than you know, even if you don't understand it at that moment. 20 years from now, I can look at the snapshot of time and see that in 2024, um, people were boycotting Target. So they're not wearing Future Collective. The clothes that they're wearing is something else. They might have a t-shirt that says buy black. You know, that tells a story about what was happening, what the mindset was, what the economic state was. If you're looking for like a small way to get started with archiving or preserving your history, your family history, or just the history of the time, take the picture, print it out, keep it.
And make like a scrapbook.
Yeah. And I just had two close family members pass away, and then going through old pictures, I really could get a vivid view of their life. Like my father passed away, but going through his pictures, like I could see from like the time that he came to America and like what he looked like, what he dressed like, and I could kind of tell like where he was in life, his age, what the style was like at the time, all the way up until like last year and what he wore. Um, Also gives me like insight into like the times and his thought process. So that's such a special thing to have, especially if you can't keep clothes or you can't keep jewelry, or you don't have any physical artifacts to keep. A picture really is worth 1,000 words.
That's beautiful. I'm so sorry for your loss, but
Yeah.
like you said, like that's it's there's nothing like a picture. Like I remember looking through like my parents' scrapbooks and seeing them like back in like the 80s and 90s. You know, it was like the jeans and the hoodies and the members only jackets, and like I could like physically like visually see like, oh my gosh, like this is what y'all were doing back in like 1987 or 1992 before I was born. And it's like I feel like I'm transported back to where they were. So, yeah, that's a that's a big point. But Nicole, what about you? What is a way that people can contribute to the preservation and celebration of diverse fashion history?
Kind of expanding on what was already said, like with pictures, it's not only taking the pictures, but also sharing it. There's so many platforms nowadays in terms of how to share, like for instance, like starting your own Instagram, that are just dedicated to maybe your family archives. And I say that because within archival records, there's still so many gaps. And a lot of it has to do with the point of view of these objects or history in general, how it's preserved and by whom. So it's important to actually put it out there because ultimately you are contributing to a grander and larger narrative that might have been overlooked or, you know, probably is part of that gap that's missing in historical records. So not only take pictures, but also share it with the world because, you know, that's how you kind of contribute to a larger narrative.
So would you say like would you view like these social media platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok as like archives?
I feel like it's a great starting point because it's almost like it can evolve into something else. So, for instance, there's an Instagram, Vintage Black Glamour, and I came across it like maybe 10 years ago, but the creator has evolved the project into books and a podcast, and it's contributed to a whole new narrative when it comes to Black fashion history. So I wonder sometimes if I never stumbled across that social media page or if others haven't, like how would it have been seen? And I think that's sort of an important aspect. But not only that, but I think it's also a great resource for other types of repositories, like libraries can add it to their library guides, and that creates a resource in itself. Like I know the Asian Fashion Archive, which again started on social media, but then evolved into a website and now is actually a resource that a lot of libraries recommend. So I do feel like it's a great start to archive, and it's not the end all be all. It can evolve into something greater.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Like using that as like a launch pad to maybe have like your own library, or have like your own like personal archive, or have like your own like photo books. I think it's a good introduction into like archives, and also like engaging like your peers and community into archives as well. But what about you, Tianni? How can people contribute to preservation and celebration of fashion history?
Sorry, Auntie, having trouble here. But yeah, to add on to what everyone's saying, especially from the photo standpoint of sharing and collecting, to add contextual information and to date the images as well. When I was interning at the Costume Institute, they bought like a huge lot of early 20th century images of like French high society. And a lot of the images didn't have dates on them. So it made it difficult to pinpoint certain things, especially like events. So it adds an extra step in the research. And if it was there, it could make things go along a lot faster. And you could share it a lot more easily too. And it paints a greater picture of the time, because we tend to forget when a decade is transitioning, it could look like similar. So 1979 could look very similar to 1981. So, and there's very like small factors that differentiate them. So having the exact date would help pinpoint and take out a lot of the guesswork. And then as it pertains to clothes, I think it's very important to learn how to preserve your clothes on the most basic level, as far as washing them properly, and not taking things to the dry cleaners that don't need to be dry cleaned because it's such a harsh chemical process, but also not washing like a leather jacket. You don't put that in the washing machine. It just won't last that way. So learning how to properly care for your pieces, and then also learning like which materials, which fabrics last the longest. I'm sure in the 70s they thought that in the mid to late 60s that all that PVC and vinyl would last, but now they are like one of the most volatile materials you can have in the archive because of all the plastic and how they off gas, and then in turn they start to degrade the pieces around them as well. So just educating yourself on how to properly care for your clothes too.
That is
You
like,
taught me something. Sorry. I I always take my clothes to dry. I take everything to dry cleaner, whether it says dry clean or not, because
Oh my
in my
gosh.
mind, I'm like, dry clean is better. Um,
Mm.
but now I know that not necessarily.
Yeah, recently someone hit me up and they were like, "Do you have tips on cleaning the sweatpants because the color is starting to bleed?" And I'm like, I have none of our sweatpants and I've never had that problem. But
Mhm.
also, you don't wash them every single time you wear them. I mean, obviously, if you like get sweaty and dirty in them, but you want to like minimize the amount of washing that you do, because in the process all the chemicals they interact. People don't think of the chemistry of clothing and how it interacts with the detergent and the fabric softener and the heat as well. in the drying process, but also the washing process.
Like, this is like blowing my mind to even think about, because yes, I dry clean like some of my clothes, and like, you know, just because I spend a lot of money on the things I buy. Like, I want things that are gonna last me. Like, I want to invest in good quality pieces. And so learning how to like take care of the clothes I already have has been like a game changer. Like, having like a good tailor will like change the way that like your clothes look and how you care for your clothes. Like, I think when I realized that you shouldn't wash denim like after every use, that was like, I learned that
Yeah.
5 years ago. I was like, what? Because I would just wear it one time, throw it in the wash.
Especially selvage denim, it's just gonna bleed. You're not gonna have the same color. It's gonna get weaker over time.
Exactly. The only one I could wash and it would keep was like my Levi jeans. Not the new Levi's, but like the old Levi's. Like, I can put them in the wash and they can stay like, they would still be as sturdy and as strong as they were. But like, I think that like preserving my clothes has been like a huge factor for me. But the point that you
Mm-hmm.
made about like the chemistry of clothing and how these chemicals react with the fabrics, like I never thought about that. Like, and that's why you see like whenever you bleach, where you have black clothes and then you have bleach and then you get bleach stains on the black clothes. Like, there's this adverse reaction like that's occurring. But that's something like that kind of like, it was a light bulb moment for me, just of like, how can we explore like how these chemicals, you know, are in relation in the chemistry of clothing. So that's something I definitely want to like dive into more, like the chemistry of fat.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I want to make sure, did everybody answer this question? I want to make sure I got everybody. I believe
Yes.
so. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Going into our last question, I can't believe like we're almost done and we've been talking for 45 minutes, because I feel like
Wow.
I know it went by so fast. But our last question, just to kind of bring this all together, is how can we create more opportunities for women of color to enter and lead into these spaces? So, like in the glam sector, like working in fashion history, working in archives, working in anthropology, like how can we create more opportunities for them to come into these spaces and excel in these spaces? We can start, let's start with Nicole.
Yeah, I think mentorship and leadership has been a huge role in terms of my work, and I feel like it's so vital. It's not only um, sort of stepping in and providing a seat, but it's also getting the mentorship and leadership, so how to grow, how to evolve within the work that you do. So I always feel like if you're in a position of power, I think it's important to think about how to share that power and make room for others. And not only just making room, but again, making sure that there's an opportunity for them to also take on the same leadership roles that you might already be in, sort of create a creative hub, a community, because it's not just one person that has that opportunity, and it shouldn't just be one person pushing the needle. It's sort of a group effort, and I think that's important to emphasize.
Absolutely. Definitely a huge emphasis on mentorship, because I think about like my experience, like if I didn't have like good mentors like in this space, like I don't feel like I would have made it to where I was, because they're going to put your name in rooms that you wouldn't even know like existed. Like 2 years ago, I didn't even know that fashion history and archiving was like an actual like career path. But meeting Armani, she's on this call. When I met Armani, she really introduced me to like this world of archives. And ever since then, it's been like such like a blessing to my life. So I think like just mentorship and connecting with the right people, connecting with your community is like so important, because you really just never know. So that's an amazing point.
And just on a
Mm-hmm.
personal note, it's also okay to evolve in the sense of like if you find yourself in a position where you're in an environment where you don't necessarily feel seen, or you feel like your research interests aren't supported, it's okay to move on to somewhere else. Like you've already experienced that environment. You're like, this is not for me, and it's okay to kind of transition or go somewhere else. And I think it's important to be open to that.
Would you have a tip on like how to locate like a good mentor? Because some people, you know, they meet the first person in the field and then they're like, okay, like this is my mentor, but um you know, then it ends up not being like a great experience. So how should people pinpoint like a good mentor?
I think it could start with someone you admire that the work that they're doing. So whether it's that you admire their work or wish or see yourself wanting to do that same work, and just approaching them. A lot of individuals are willing to share their knowledge or share their expertise because it didn't take one person to get them there. It took a variety, a community. So I think it's an overemphasis of not being afraid to put yourself out there and approach someone who you might not necessarily have a relationship with or know, but it's okay to like have a start, introduce yourself, mention your interests and I guess your intention in terms of what you would love to learn from them. Like just being open. There's no really clear blueprint or linear way of going about it because it can also be someone you admire in a completely different field, in a different creative field. Like one of my mentors is in the costume industry, in film and TV productions, and I don't do that. I do fashion archiving, but a lot of the way that she works in terms of working with creatives, I admire because she does it from a standpoint of building relationships and friendships and not so transactional in terms of projects. And I admire that. So it can really come from anywhere.
Absolutely. And I like that you emphasize like not transactional. I think mentorship can sometimes feel transactional. So finding someone to where like it is like, you know, business or professional, but there's still like that personal element too, I think is definitely important to have. But Taniqua, what about you? How can we create more opportunities for women of color to enter and lead into these spaces?
I think Nicole gave a great answer, which is certainly mentorship. And even if not full-blown mentorship, just people who are already working in the space being willing to have the conversation with people who aren't interested. I know that through my podcast, I've been able to sit down and talk with a lot of people who have then like introduced me to more people in the space. And we may not have made like a long-term connection, but just having an initial conversation and them just telling me like what avenues are available, how they got to where they are, who they talked to, what school they went to, what things they study. All of that was helpful information for me along in my journey. So networking, mentorship, but I will also add that if you are in the space where you can create the platform, then create a platform. And it doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to start off as anything huge, but I think the more platforms that we have, the more opportunities we open up for people of color and women of color, especially to be able to have something to do in the field. Now, instead of waiting for a job to be the principal archivist at a major brand, someone can come work for Black Girls in Archive, right? Like there are more jobs now available in this space because someone started a platform. So I think don't discount, what that could turn into and what opportunities that could open up for someone else, especially if where you are now, you don't see yourself represented or you don't see a way that you can have your interests be represented. Don't be afraid to start your own thing. I mean, that was the impetus behind me starting Black Fashion History. And now I've created a space that allows, for other women to come into this area and learn more and work and be able to contribute to this narrative of preserving fashion history, and for me, especially Black fashion history.
Absolutely. And Tianni, what about you? How can we create more opportunities for women of color to enter and lead into these spaces?
So I definitely agree with both Nicole and Taniqua. Mentorship and community building is like one of the easiest ways to get your foot in the door too, because literally it could just start with a conversation and being transparent about your intentions. And I think that's the most important thing too, because I've had more people reach out to me over the years as I elevate in my career, but oftentimes it was just like, oh, I thought we were gaining a connection, but you were just seeking my contacts, or you weren't trying to learn how to do it. You were just hoping that I would give the
Mm,
source to you. But it was like I had to learn it myself. And the way things turn out for me and my approach might not look the same for you. You might not get the same outcome because we're different people.
mm,
Um, and then to Taniqua's point, I think building your own platform, especially, that's what I did with Archive Alive.
mm,
Love Thom Browne down, but they don't cover Black culture and hip hop and Black fashion in the way that I would, and the way that I imagine it, especially because it's so personal to me. And I know visually what I want it to look like and how I want to present it to people, how I want it to be communicated. And I also think it's very important to learn the infrastructure of what you're trying to come into, the industry you're trying to penetrate. Because in archives, I didn't realize that there was so many different avenues and lanes that you can go into. And you could create your own lane also, which is what I did. But I was able to do that by learning the game and how it already exists, and what voids needed to be filled, and how I could step in my previous experience and how that would look in this space and making it my own. So there's a lot of opportunity if you do your due diligence and just learn what the infrastructure looks like. And then once you learn what the infrastructure looks like, you learn who you will want to reach out to, whose career paths look most interesting to you. I LinkedIn warrior. I am always like, who is the archivist at this company? How long have they been there? What was their path there? What did their educational path look like? Because a lot of times too, I know people might get discouraged in the archives field because there is a barrier to entry. The archive certificate or program is a graduate degree. It's not undergrad. So some people think like, damn, I have to go to library school and then I have to go to grad school in order to be an archivist. But there's a lot of people who didn't do it that way, and I'm one of them. So it's all about, I really think, like doing your due diligence, meeting people, and then also just identifying how you want to show up in the space.
absolutely. And I think that's something that's missing, is that a lot of people aren't doing their due diligence. So then it's just like you said, like they want you to just give you the secret sauce. Like, how do I become an archivist for a high fashion brand, or how do I like become a fashion historian? But it's not just that easy to where like you can write an ebook and say this is how you do XYZ. So I think like just doing your research and doing your absolute due diligence of like what you want to do and being clear on that and having like a clear guidelines, I think that's what's going to like, push people towards success and like their goals.
Right. And it'll keep you on track also.
Mhm.
It'll give you that reminder, why am I doing it and how will I do it to get to that place?
Absolutely. So I want to give enough time for our Q&A section, but I definitely enjoyed our discussion. It went by too fast. I feel like we need a whole nother hour, but maybe we can do a part two. We can plan for a part two. But I see a question in the chat from, is it Delali? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But your question is, do you have any advice on building community or finding resonance in such environments? And so they're saying that they're having trouble expressing their fashion work in Austria and Germany, and the scene doesn't align. So how would they build community and finding like those environments where it's not necessarily, they don't necessarily see it?
So there's a lot of different archival communities and organizations. I'm not sure what they have there, but I know in the US there's also like some groups that are open to international members also, or they might have other chapters. So maybe you could look into your version of the Costume Society of America. I know that they have like other chapters. Society of American Archivists, obviously, like the what would the equivalent of that be? There's the Black Memory Workers group that my friend Zakia Collier co-founded, and we have people from all over the diaspora in the group. Um, yeah, so I would say start with LinkedIn, also social media, but there's different communities out there that do exist. It might take a little bit of digging, but definitely like look into organizations that already exist. And if you're a student or new in the field, a lot of times if they call for a membership fee, it'll be discounted for students and new professionals.
I'll also add to go out to events and places where you think it may not align with your interest, because you'll be surprised who all you find there who also connect on the same thing. So I'm sure there are museums, museum events or exhibitions that you can visit, go to the receptions and like network and meet people. You will probably find at least one other person that's also interested in what you're interested in. And you all can kind of talk about, ways to find and build community. You can start community with each other. And that will also lead you to more information. I personally go to SCAD here in Atlanta quite often for fashion things. Very rarely do they specifically talk about Black fashion things, but I meet so many people um, who are also interested in that. And that leads me to other organizations, other events, other platforms. So get out there, get to mingling, and you'll be surprised what you find.
Yeah, I also think it's important to consider maybe starting something. So depending on what specifically you're interested in, you yourself can probably organize like an open call or like a workshop to just gather people who might have the same interests as you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of a museum. It could be something as simple as a coffee shop or a library or a bookstore, and that can be the start of something, sort of like a meetup. And then that can evolve into sort of something greater with the community ultimately that you're building.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I definitely just want to add like the best way I would definitely say is just going outside, being among the people. It's just a different connection in person versus virtual. You could feel the energy, you could read the person differently. And a lot of times too, because I can be a little like socially anxious. So I'll go to an event and I'll go like get a little glass of wine and I'll play the corner. But someone will come up to me and they'll notice, like, oh, she's a little shy, but I like her outfit. Let me go talk to her. And that happens more often than not. So even if you might not have the confidence to like go up to people, people might come up to you. And a lot of times, like if you have on a fire outfit, that's the best conversation starter.
Yeah, that's literally my networking hack because I'm also an introvert and I'm just not good at going up to people and talking. Every time I go out to an
Mm-hmm.
event, I always wear something that I know is going to get a lot of compliments, based on me wearing it before. So that's a good tip. Wear something that'll get people coming to you and be like, "Oh, girl, your outfit's cute or your earrings cute or something." And that's an easy
Yeah.
start conversation.
I agree. I think that's also a good like personal connection that you can make, because I think in my experience, or in the past when I've gone to networking events, it always felt very sort of transactional, like, what do you do? But I think having more of a personal connection, a conversation first is sort of the best way to build whatever community of your interest that you're building.
And the way that you present yourself, like say you run into the same people at different events, that will be a part of your identity. That's how people will identify you in the space. Like they might not even see you from the front, but they'll notice the outfit and certain details that you might wear often. They're like, oh, that's her. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I can relate to my fellow introverts. However, I don't know, like for some reason, like socializing. Like I can go out and go up to somebody and be like, oh my gosh, I like your outfit. And then like hear their whole life story. So I don't know. I think I'm like in between that. But like you said, like even back when I was like shyer, or even when I don't feel as social, even though I have on like a great outfit, people approach me. They'll be like, I love your outfit. Like, where did you get it? And then we go down this whole rabbit hole of just like talking about like fashion and just like identities. So yeah, that's definitely a really good point. Using like yourself or your outfit as like an icebreaker or a conversation starter. So absolutely. I want to get to these other questions. Raquel, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Yes, hello, y'all. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to learn alongside everyone and to listen to this brilliant conversation. I am interested in fashion editing and writing. I'm currently a SCAD Master of Fine Arts student, and I also applied to the fashion editorial internship at Black Girls in Archive Fashion. I have a question regarding writing. In what ways does strong writing influence how fashion is perceived, interpreted, and remembered by audiences? And I can also put that in the chat.
I love that question because as an avid reader, of as a writer, I feel like you have to be an avid reader as well. They go hand in hand. And one of the best things is like the way that a writer describes something. It really sets apart, especially in the fashion sense. How do you describe the textile? How does it feel? How does it look? Describe the color in detail. Is it blue or is it cobalt? Things like that. Does it shine when the light hits it? Is it dull? Is it matte? Is it translucent? Just really expanding on your observations and
Thank
communicating that in a way that someone who isn't familiar with fashion can understand it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just gonna say, I'm a huge avid, or I'm very interested in storytelling and very captivated by storytellers, and not in necessarily the traditional sense. It can be inspired or initiated from a physical object. So I love sort of the wear of a fashion object and how it reveals so much history, not only of the garment itself, but also the wearer. Like this, if there's a hole or a tear or even a dirt, like what's the story behind that specific tear, and what does it reveal about the wearer? It could be something as simple as, maybe something a little bit more personal, like a fancy dress. It has a hole, so it's sort of like a memento or a moment in time that reveals so much about their life. I love that aspect, or that connection of the wearer to the wearer.
Thank you.
Oh, to add to what both Tianni and Nicole said, I also think positioning is important for a writer. As a writer, I can think of yourself like as the storyteller, and the way that you present that to the audience is how the audience is going to receive it. So being very intentional about how you talk about certain things, when you're taking Black brands as an example, when you're speaking of a Black brand, are you framing it in terms of a negative or a positive? That dictates how the audience is going to receive it. It's the difference between like ex-convict saves lives or, you know, working class man saves lives. Like how are you positioning the story and how do you want people to react to it? So be very intentional about that. I think that those are the sorts of things that years from now give us insight into what's happening or what was happening in history and how we should remember it, and if we should revere it or not.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this additional insight, and I hope to get writing soon.
Thank you so much for your question, Raquel. That was a really, really good question. So let's go to Sierra. Sierra with the C, because there's two Sierras in here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this time. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I have one main question, but I also have a smaller follow-up question. So if that's okay. But my first question is there, I think like with the general online community, we have such a shorter attention span and we tend to forget history a lot faster. So I'm wondering in your work, especially how conversations right now are so cyclical, like not even 20 years back, but like 5 years back now. I'm wondering in your work, is there something that you've come across where you think if people just remembered this, we wouldn't have as many cyclical conversations, or this is something that is foundational that constantly gets left out of like viral fashion conversations?
I have an answer to that question, but I also want you to ask your follow-up question. That way we can answer both um, when we give our answers.
Okay. And so my follow-up question is not necessarily related to the first one, but I am a fashion writer by trade, at fashion editorial writing, but I started off because I was interested in fashion archives. And so I'm trying to incorporate both now. And so I'm wondering, um, I know there are different paths that you can go to be more experienced in archives. When it comes to what I was looking into, I was looking into Masters of Library Science, but that feels a little bit too broad for what I'm interested in. So I'm wondering, across what you all have come across, are there specific certificate programs or something that you would recommend would also help someone who's kind of wanting to merge more than one thing?
I would say to answer your follow-up question, look into public history programs. A lot of people that work in archives are also like public historians. So you don't necessarily focus on like the library side, you focus more on like the history side. So I would look into like public history programs.
Also, oh, sorry. Um, At FIT, they have a program for fashion textiles, and I forgot like the official name, but a lot of people who complete their program work in museums, especially at the Met and the Costume Institute, um, and other corporate archives as well. And then NYU, they have a costume studies graduate program. And then they also have, you could do a dual program, which I looked into, but I'm just not sure if I want to dedicate the time to school right now. But you can do their costume studies and library program together. NYU offers the costume studies program, and LIU, Long Island University, offers the library school program. And I think it's like half and half.
Thank you.
Well,
Oh,
I also add that museum studies might also be something that could be a good fit for you depending on your interests. But also sometimes you don't have to go a traditional degree program route. So a lot of schools offer the option to take classes as a non-degree seeking student. And so you can look into schools that they may have one-off classes that fit with what you're looking to learn and do, and you can kind of mix and match your classes if you're not so attached to getting a degree. If you just want to get the knowledge, try looking into some non-degree seeking programs.
And also, if you want to sort of get a taste of what it might be like before committing to a degree, you can take on like workshops. I know some public libraries provide workshops for conservation, usually like a 1 day for free, or there are associations like the Costume Society of America. They also do workshops. So, I would maybe consider workshops or even maybe volunteer at a local fashion archive. Usually it's probably advertised as like a costume shop, and that'll kind of give you a taste of what it might be like before committing to a degree. And I'm only saying that because I went to Parsons and I did my master's in fashion studies, and it was very much research, critical thinking, theory. And it wasn't until after I graduated that I started to dig a little bit more and do a little bit more in fashion archives. And then little by little, I became interested in library and information science more from a collections management standpoint, because there are certain programs and theories and ideologies when it comes to library science that one would have to know if that's the route they want to go in. So yeah, I would just be open into maybe doing either a volunteer or an internship or even a 1 day workshop to get a little bit of insight if like you're ready to dedicate 2 years to pursue this.
Mm-hmm. And Nicole, I'm glad you brought up your experience at Parsons, because it is very, like, each program, each school, they specialize in different things. From what I've been told from people who attended FIT, it's more collections management based. You're more hands-on. And I heard people who went the NYU route is very theoretical. It's a lot more writing and research and study in that way. So you're not as hands-on with the materials.
Yeah, and my class was the third graduating class, so the program was fairly new. I think since then they probably expanded a little bit, because I think since then they've actually developed an archive with Parsons with actual fashion objects. I'm not sure how that archive is used, but during my time there, it didn't exist. So I don't know how the curriculum is now, but I just know it wasn't until I actually had the hands-on aspect that I realized, like, okay, this is the direction I want to go in. So I would definitely, again, recommend maybe a hands-on experience before committing to like a 2 year program.
Thank you so much.
I do want to answer your first question because I thought it was good.
Oh yeah.
And hopefully I understand it and remember it correctly. But the thing that I would say that I wish people remembered about fashion, and it's a question that I know we planned to talk about in the roundtable but didn't quite get to, is I wish people remember not to divorce fashion from its cultural context. And I think that would solve a lot of issues of not just appropriation, but also appreciation, and like preservation and like documenting history. So everything that comes out of fashion is attached to the people, um, what they were doing at the time, what they were engaging in, what they believe, what the culture is always reflective of the culture. And I think if we kept that in mind and also became more curious about that, like not just wearing things just to wear it, but look into where does this come from? Why did this happen? Why do people use this? How do people use this? And appreciate that more. We could kind of solve for a lot of some of the like disingenuousness people feel in fashion.
Did anyone else want to tackle that question?
Well, I guess just to kind of reiterate, it's important to definitely be louder than the algorithms. A lot of I guess like with digital archives or fashion archives or whatever we see, I think it's important that we amplify the voices behind the scenes, whether it be the fashion designer. Sorry, I live in New York, it's kind of loud out here. You know, whether it be the fashion designer or spotlighting the history of the wearer of the garment, I think that's so important because it's still a part of fashion history. And I think based on my experience and the research that I do, there's so much digging through or connecting the dots when it comes to history, whether it's the wearer or who owned it or who donated. And there's so much that's missing, so many gaps. And I think by documenting or archiving now, it'll make it easier in the future through that process. But also it's very important to just amplify those voices as well.
Can you restate the question, please?
Yeah, so my question essentially is, since with social media we forget things a lot faster because we have shorter attention spans, what is something that you wish if people remembered it would be easier to have more nuanced conversations around fashion archiving, or we wouldn't have as many cyclical conversations back and forth?
Cite your sources. Cite your sources, give people their credit, and create metadata. Make the information accessible, and also do your research to make sure the information that you're sharing is correct. We are in the age of misinformation, and it spreads so easily and so quickly. And me with Archive Alive, that was my mission, to make sure I would see like really cool images, especially like on Tumblr, but you would never know like who's in the photo, who took the photo, when was the photo taken, what are they wearing. I would just have so many questions. And once I started to just like do my own research and started to share it, that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to make it a point that I always provide all the information that is available to me. And with that information available to me, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper and maybe provide some facts that might not be well known, maybe connect some dots as it pertains to today and how that information connects with each other. Yeah, just like connecting the dots, giving people their credit, and providing context.
Thank you so much, all of you, for all of your answers. This has been such a good conversation, and it feels full circle because both Tianni and Taniqua, both of your platforms were really integral in me jumping into fashion writing at all. Like the first fellowship I did was Black fashion, and I cited both of you all in my application. So it's nice to be in this conversation.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for your support.
And then we do have one more question so we can wrap up, from Sierra with an S. How can emerging designers or creatives ensure they're contributing to the legacy of Black women in fashion? I know we kind of touched on it, but we can give like a little like quick answer as we wrap up.
I think everything that Tianni and Nicole just said, like cite your sources, say their names essentially. You know, that's how we amplify the voices and give credit where credit is due and kind of preserve that legacy over time. And then for the designer specifically, I say dress Black women and also use imagery of Black women. I think a lot of times designers kind of stray away, maybe not recently as we have the emergence of more Black brands, but sometimes designers stray away from using Black women in their imagery. I think that is an easy way to ensure that you are contributing to the preservation of the legacy of Black women and their contributions to fashion and style, is by just including them in the things that you do.
And I was just going to mention that if there's already an existing text that's profiling a Black fashion designer, it's okay to add on to that scholarly work. I watched an interview with Elizabeth Way, who wrote a biography on Anne Lowe, and she mentioned like there's so many books on Dior that there's still room to still study and discuss Anlo's work. And I think that's important. There's still room, there's still more sort of writings and research to contribute to the overall history, not only in fashion, but also Black history.
I think also the designers need to include Black women in the decision-making processes, because a lot of times they'll have us, you know, as the creatives, you'll be the makeup artist or the hairstylist, or you might be a creative director. They might give you that. But a lot of times, like, the decisions have already been made prior to us, and we are just like brought in to help execute. And in the process of execution, I have definitely been in the position where I'm like, if y'all consulted with me on this, if we could have brought this to a whole other level, it could have had a deeper meaning. Like it just could have meant so much more. It could have been a more comprehensive idea if or not even, you know, not just myself, but if a Black woman was in that position. Because I think also we have like a very specific level of attention to detail that other people don't possess. So if we're brought into those conversations as they're happening, we can pinpoint certain things that work and don't work, and things that might be able to enhance it.
Absolutely. I think those are like all really strong points. But to wrap up, I just want to say thank y'all so much for joining us tonight. This discussion was just well needed. I just love, like I said before, talking with people that love fashion and appreciate fashion just as much as I do. Like it's like, I don't know, I feel butterflies like when I talk about it. So I appreciate Nicole, Taniqua, Tianni, y'all for sitting down, chatting with me. I appreciate all of our attendees coming in and listening to us and asking your questions. So if y'all need anything, be sure to follow us on Black Girls in Archives and Black Girls in Archives Fashion. I dropped everybody's contact info in the chat, so be sure to follow us. Be sure to follow everybody so you can stay in touch about future events. But thank y'all so much for joining, and I hope you guys have an amazing night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.